second module. This is, I believe, the third webinar presentation. We've had a discussion circle, but this is the third webinar presentation in this second module where we're looking at and focused on re-envisioning archetypal identities of women. And I think this work is so important for so many reasons, but I think, you know, one of those is giving ourselves a different lens with which to see what may have been hidden in plain sight for many of us. The mythologies and the stories that are being shared are not necessarily new stories. Most of them, I would guess, are probably very familiar, but I think the particular focus and the lens with which each of the faculty members are bringing to these mythologies, to these stories, the insights that they're sharing and they're giving us, I think, opportunities to see what maybe we have not seen. And the reason that's important is, like anything else, like the Wonder Woman movie that everyone, you know, that so many women were talking about, it's so important for us to see ourselves reflected, not only in the outer world, but reflected in the archetypal world. And to recognize, especially, I think, in a couple of things, you know, I think these a couple of key pieces that more often than not are either hidden or they are transmogrified relative to the identities of women are you know, owning our own power as women, owning our own self-agency as women, our right to act, not only to wait to be rescued by the hero, but what does our own hero's journey, what does that look like? And it's not about any necessarily an essentialist, but there are archetypal patterns in Carol's work where I'm so honored and thrilled to have Carol Pearson sharing with all of us tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about Carol. She is an author, a speaker, a workshop leader, an educator in private practice, best known as an expert on the applications of myth, archetypes, and narrative to contemporary life and work. She has written, she's a prolific writer. Her most recent book, Persephone Rising, Awakening the Heroine Within. She'll be talking about that material, I believe, primarily this evening, but Carol has written a number of other books, including The Hero Within, 6 Archetypes We Live By, Awakening the Heroes Within, 12 Archetypes to Help Us Find Ourselves and Transform Our World. She has developed a assessment instrument that identifies active archetypes in organizations and in corporations. A couple of her other books, The Transforming Leader, The Hero and the Outlaw, and Mapping the Organizational Psyche. Carol, as you can tell, is a scholar, and she is a gifted presenter, and I am thrilled and honored to introduce her to those of you who may not have already met her or had the opportunity to. So Carol, thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It is actually, I want to make this fun. I've been thinking about what I'm going to be talking about is information from the research I did on Persephone Rising from the Eleusinian Mysteries, which were the most important mystery religion of ancient Greece. That it started out as a women's religion, or kind of pathway, and then it became it caught on, so that people from every station in life, male and female, including the highest, most prestigious people and slaves, would be part of this, with men and women doing all of it together. People would come from all over the Mediterranean to be part of this, and it is one of those situations where the ancient ancient origin got changed a bit, and when it was written down by male scholars and powerful people, So once again, some of the original got distorted or obscured, but thank goodness we have incredible scholars who are giving us an idea of what it might have been. I'm talking about this because, and I'm going to be making this clear, it is archetypally like a template for looking at what's happening in the world today in politics and popular culture. Pam, I know you're from Australia. I'm going to give some examples from the United States because it's so clear here. But what I'm talking about is happening all over. It's not just here. So many of you may have at some point in your studies or your life, like maybe middle school, read Edith Hamilton's stories about mythology, and you may have encountered the story of Demeter and Persephone, and that's the major story that I'm talking about. And of course, many of you are most likely have encountered that in Jungian work if you've done other Jungian work before this time. In the ancient mysteries and in the story, there were actually 4 characters. In the story that you may know, and I'm about to tell in a minute, there's Demeter, who is the Earth Mother. There's Zeus, who is the chief god and kind of like the king. And there's Persephone, who's the daughter, their daughter, and she is the transformational agent. And so I actually, and the other ancient god who was a part of the mysteries themselves was Dionysus, the god of joy. And in every one of these situations, I'm going to say now, I really love happy endings. And my belief about these 4 archetypes is that they each have something to contribute to us, even though the hardest one is the Zeus character, to translate what a more evolved version of that archetype would be. And each one of those characters goes through a transformation during the course of the story, or allied stories that can tell us a good bit about that. So to give you since I know you've been alerted in many ways to sexism, I'm going to just give you, and that is hard. You know, it's really hard to see how pernicious that is, and particularly as some people are getting scared about women having much to what it means for women to have rights and what it might mean for male power. It's a hard time. It's a time of counter-revolution, essentially. So what I'd like you to do is be in your bodies for a minute.
Carol, can I just, I hate to interrupt, but I know people are sending me messages saying they're having difficulty hearing you. Can you?
All right, let me get close. How
Yeah.
about that? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I need to repeat?
Yeah, yes, heads are shaking, yes, a little bit.
Okay, what I'm going to do, heads are shaking that I should repeat because you really couldn't hear me.
Well, just a little bit. I think maybe just just the last few sentences.
Okay, that each of those 4 archetypes that I talked about, archetypal characters, each one of them goes through a transformation, and it's a transformation that could be in process now. An equivalent transformation could be in process now. So what I'd like to have you do for a minute is be very conscious of how you are in your body. And I want you to think first about the Earth Mother, Demeter, who is just like opening the heart, getting very, very grounded in the earth, connecting up, put down some roots, and open your heart and open your arms to the world. And Demeter is all about, at her best, the connected consciousness with all other people, with the animals, with the earth, with the sky, with the universe. And then there's Zeus, and he's the sky god, and he actually, at his best, is about strength. So if you let your body feel strength, feel focus, feel a bit of arrogance. I want what I want and I'm going to get it. Okay, got that? Okay. And then there's Persephone. And Persephone is a transformational presence. She is the presence in the story that's shaman-like. And so if you could either imagine or put up one arm and the other one down, you can imagine it as fine. She is connecting the earth and the sky, and in her individuality in terms of what it is she wants. And what she does is look for the opening. She's not fighting, she's not giving, she's just looking for how to get there. And then the last one is Dionysus. And Dionysus at his best is just really about how fun life is. And let's go dance and be in celebration and be in joy. And I'm seeing Dionysus as the hope for some of our countries where people are in conflict with one another and the conflict between men and women. So that's the short form. We can stop now. No, not really. Okay. The story. The story of Demeter and Persephone, short form. Can you hear me? I can see your faces. So if you let me know. I can see you. The story of Demeter and Persephone starts with Demeter in a meadow, and it's very beautiful, and she's a very sweet young girl. She's an early teenager, and she sees a flower, and it's the most beautiful flower that she has ever seen, and she just wants it. Flower, and as she does, the earth cracks open. Hades, who is the dark man, handsome, coming up from the underworld, comes and grabs her and takes her to the underworld. Demeter has no idea where her daughter is when she comes. No one seems to have seen what happened. She is incredibly distraught, as anybody would be. And she, in this, and she begins to ask everybody what they might have seen. No one will tell her anything. They either don't know or they're scared of Zeus because he had something to do with this. She finally finds Hecate, who's the old wise woman goddess, and who stands at the crossroads and helps people make decisions. And she said, I didn't see it, but I heard her cry. Let's go up and talk to Apollo. He's in the sky, he's the sun god, and he will have seen it. They go up there. Apollo pats her on the head, patronizes her, and says, it's okay. Zeus is her dad, which was dead from a one-night stand. And so it's all fine. She has a prestigious marriage to the god of the underworld. Demeter is, you can imagine if you had a daughter and somebody took her and said, oh, it's all right. Well, it wasn't all right. And Demeter takes off, and she is in deep grief and fear, and she is furious that this has happened. She's furious with Zeus and with everybody else who seems to be complicit and think that what he has ordained is really okay. She travels and travels and travels, and she doesn't eat and she doesn't bathe. And finally, she's sitting on a sitting down by the sea, and some young women from a royal family in the Luces take her in. She becomes her nanny, and I'm going to skip some of this because I know Laura Lee is going to talk about it later in the course. But during that process, something happens that makes her really mad. And when she gets mad, she says, "I am a goddess. Build me a temple." And suddenly, instead of being pathetic and totally in distress, she takes action. And the action she takes is to stop, um, basically keeping the system going. She is the god, she's the earth mother. She stops letting vegetation and the grain grow, and a great famine comes in the world. Eventually, what happens with that is Zeus keeps assuming that she will come around and be a sensible woman, like happens very often to some of us, but she doesn't. She doesn't come around, and finally, he essentially gives in. Now, this is Demeter's story, and later I'll mention what happened with Persephone. But Persephone comes back then from the underworld because Demeter demands that she does, and basically announces that she ate some pomegranate seeds, and therefore she will have to go back to the underworld for half the year. But she could be with her mom for the other half of the year. And I see that. I'm not talking loud enough, yes. And what happens is that everybody seems pretty fine about that, and Zeus throws a big party, and everybody is happy. Except that in the patriarchal version of this story, Demeter, that's why the moral of the story, in the patriarchal version is that's why we have the seasons, because when Persephone is in the underworld, Demeter is sad and does not make the grain and the vegetation grow. The more ancient Eleusinian meaning of Persephone's situation is that she became the presence that could move between the world, to go to the underworld, to come up from the underworld, to go up into the mountain, and that she was the link between the gods and the mortals. And she started the Eleusinian mysteries so that she could teach humans, and with her mom, humans, how to be happy. And the promise of the Eleusinian mysteries was that you could be happy when you went through these mysteries, that you would be happy, that you would be prosperous, or at least feel abundance, and that you will have courage. And part of that was that you would never again fear death, because Persephone was on your side, and you could go back and forth between the underworld and the upper world. Okay, so that's the basic story. The archetype of Demeter, it has been essentially throughout patriarchal history, has been the female role. We were supposed to be all loving, all embracing, take care of everybody, and that the lesson for us with our Demeter sides in that role was to not give in to the patriarchal message that we should sacrifice ourselves to everybody else, but actually to find a way to balance the needs of other people and our own needs. Politically, right now we have, you can think about the Democratic Party as carrying, in the United States, as carrying the energy of Demeter. It's, the focus of the Democratic Party has been on caring for the earth, paying attention to climate change, caring for people, and the great much of what is being talked about by the Democratic Party comes from this all-loving image, archetypal, wonderful archetypal energy, which is about keeping people safe, taking care of them, keeping partnering with the earth. Demeter was the goddess of agriculture, and it's also about collaboration. So, in international events, the Democrats are much more into collaborating with allies and working together for peace. All that is very Demeter connected kind of consciousness in the world. We have what Demeter actually gets and needs is a little bit of Zeus energy. So let's shift for a minute to Zeus. I got interested in this partly because Zeus reminds me of Donald Trump. He's his energy. He started out in his story. He started out exiled from his family. His mother exiled him to protect him from being eaten by his father, who was swallowing his children. And he has so that the energy, the kind of sky god energy that that is positive and it's like force, can become negative when it becomes arrogant. But the journey of Zeus was moving from being like this scared little boy, and you can, by the way, see that in a lot of very patriarchal men, that it's right underneath, which is one of the reasons that many traditional women have learned to always take care of male egos, because there's this scared little boy underneath. But then he claims his warrior energy, and then when he claims his warrior energy, he goes and he deposes his father, and that's a great archetypal hero myth, archetypal pattern of the son deposing and defeating the father and taking his place. And with that, there's instead of a connected consciousness, there's a hierarchical consciousness, which is about trying to be on top. And in our culture, it's a meritocracy ideal. The best we will compete with one another, and the best will get to the top. And then everything will work really well, because competition and battling and fighting for a position in the world will actually bring out our best qualities. We have Donald Trump as the he's really so like Zeus. Zeus was rather arrogant, and he bragged a lot, and he was a philanderer for, and he in his case, he didn't just rope women, he raped them, and that was considered an okay thing to do in that time for a god. I don't think it was for a person necessarily. In any case, well, I would make another connection with Donald, with the Donald, and Zeus is his relationship with his wife. Hera was always miserable because he was off messing around with other people, and we are now seeing that being played out and right in front of us. The dominant energy of this sky god is its ruler archetype and its warrior archetype. And that's being held in our culture right now with the Republican Party, that if you think it's hawkish in our country, I know that that's not true in a lot of other countries, but they actually are um, deifying guns. I mean, guns are almost like something we're supposed to bow to is the thing we most value in the world, which is not a statement about guns themselves, but around a certain attitude. Um, and um, and a focus on competition and capitalism, and in sports like football. Um, and a lot of the focus there is, and this is very Zeus-like, and it's part of this archetype, some of which Demeter needed, um, is the idea that you have to be strong, and the competition makes you strong, and you have a right to fight for what you want. And you can see that in our culture today, one of the things that's happening with women is claiming that, to say, no, we're going to fight. We're going to fight for what we want, and we're going to fight to be heard. Um, and that is essentially Zeus energy. And Demeter essentially gets a homeopathic dose of Zeus energy when she says, basically, I'm going to get what I want right now. And yes, some people will die, but this is what I want, because the people would die because of the famine. And we actually have that in the Republican Party when they say, if we don't feed that, to keep people tough and avoid being a wimpy kind of society, it's better for us not to provide health care, not to give people too much help if they're poor, etc. It's the same kind of attitude of trying to breed strength in a population. There's actually, when Demeter is in that moment where she gets angry, she is taking care of the child of the royal family, and the baby, and she's trying to make the baby immortal by putting it in the fire. And I think this is a different point than Lauralee is going to make. When the mother comes in, she puts it in the fire to make it immortal. But when the mother comes in, she thinks she's killing the baby. And of course, she's furious and screaming and everything. And Demeter, there's a part of Demeter who realizes that, oh, the mother is seeing this like I saw what Zeus was doing to Persephone. And when, there's that thing that when we can't defeat, or reason with what we can't understand that we have inside of us. It's like, for a lot of us as women, when we see patriarchy and how much pain it's actually caused, we can't be effective in dealing with that until we also see it in ourselves and see the other side of it. That is, it doesn't, the positive qualities in this archetype do not require us in its higher level. That's very primitive, this desire to, always defeat other people or kill them or have a war with them. And we're, as humans, we're in a position where we can stop that. We can move past that. And so what we're seeing is in, say, the women's marches, and now in the United States, the young people, the Parkland survivors, going to having marches about gun control. We have a history of that kind of standing up and fighting. And there's the lower level of the Zeus energy is power over, but as that archetype evolves, it can become power for what we believe in, and power with. And as those two archetypes of the Demeter archetype, the sky god and the earth mother, come together, then the negative sides of each can be corrected. Is there anything anybody wants to share right now before I move on to Persephone? No, okay. The other point here is that when we look at some of the patriarchal men around us, and remember, and of course, a lot of us have found men who have moved way beyond that and are very different. But we can see the potential for what they could become. And what actually happens, and this is true collectively and individually, that the Zeus-like man respects power and changes when women don't let that behavior continue. And that's on the individual level, and that's on the collective level. That's what it takes, what it really takes. And I remember going to the Women's March right after Trump's inauguration, and I had seen on TV a lot of the rallies that were so violent and hostile. And then I went to this march, and it was women and men taking care of each other. We were packed so tightly into going down the street, or sometimes stuck where we couldn't move. There were so many people, and everybody was taking care of each other. But the energy was also about essentially the same kind of thing as time's up. We're not putting up with this anymore, and we want something different, which is an integration of those two archetypal energies. Any comments, or should I move on to Persephone and Dionysus?
Carol, I think, part of the points that you're making are huge. I mean, really profound points relative to a feminine assimilation of a Zeus energy. I mean, that alone is such a, and what does that energy look like when it manifests in women and through women? It's so important right now, because the conversation right now, and it's been a conversation in this group relative to anger. What do we do with anger? Where, in a sense, women have been marginal. Oh, it's just another angry woman. So when a woman gets angry, it serves to marginalize her. And there is this sense that I think many of us carry, that it's wrong to even be angry as a woman. And so the way you're presenting it tonight is really fascinating relative to Demeter kind of drawing on, because we're talking archetypally, right? So Demeter drawing on that archetypal Zeus energy, where we don't make the same, I think, mistake of transmogrifying that patriarchal power in a good sense, because patriarchy isn't necessarily bad any more than matriarchy is bad. So the point that you're bringing, I think, is a huge one, of tapping into that archetypal Zeus energy in a way and allowing it to move through us as women in a way that is generative. I love how you're linking it to the march. It was people taking care of each other at the same time, instead of marching into battle to conquer and to kill and to destroy and to determine who's going to be king of the mountain. It was marching together side by side, taking care of each other in the process.
There's also a difference in how Demeter went with the homeopathic dose of Zeus. What Demeter does, she doesn't go kill him or fight him or depose him. She realizes, she really looks at how she is being complicit. He continues to be able to be an autocratic leader because she keeps making the grain grow. And I was reading the other day about that. Finland, by the way, is one of the most prosperous countries in the world, and it's number one in the world's happiness index, number one, and is always two or three, one, two or three. And then about 1970, I don't remember the actual date, but the 90% of women in Finland went on strike for a day to let the men know what would happen if they stopped cooperating. They didn't go to work. They didn't cook at home. I think they did do some childcare, but they didn't, they didn't clean the house. They didn't pick up anybody's socks. They just stopped. And that's a particularly interesting, I think, piece for a lot of us to think about is in what way are we keeping the system going? And that's really different than coming out with fury. It is really, I love with the Me Too movement, just time's up. We're just not taking something anymore. And it isn't an attack, and it doesn't feel out of control. And part of that is that really extreme anger comes when we are projecting the blame for everything onto the man and not seeing our part. There's all kinds of reasons that over the development of patriarchy that women decided to let it happen. And because you have kids, you want them to stay. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons that women would have made those kinds of decisions and still do. So I think once we stop and see our part and what can I stop doing that is part of this. The new movie, Three Billboards. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, we were talking about it in the discussion circle just the other week. Yeah.
That's, by the way, that is Demeter.
Mm-hmm.
It's Demeter. Mm-hmm. But in that case, she actually does throw fire.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the bigger thing is that without the fire, she just has this sense, I'm not going to let all these guys in the police force just let it not go after the person who killed my daughter, not do something about this. And she is fierce about that. In that case, she is fierce in ways that does produce that kind of fear in a lot of people, that they turn it into judgment around women. So it is a hard question, but I do think that there are times to just be angry. But nonviolent communication, we can all remember to use nonviolent communication, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to demonize other people. And we can understand there's a different archetype and it has value. It just doesn't have value in a way when it's hurting us or hurting other people or hurting the earth, in which case it becomes a warrior for, not a warrior over, or a warrior against.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I was wondering if in Greek myths there's we have the marches, which is not so much a hero archetype. It's something else. The closest I can come, I think of a jazz ensemble, where they're attuned to one another. One steps forward and he's still attuned to, or she's attuned to who's behind them. And then another comes forward and they're taking turns, but they're attuned to one another. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what an archetype for that would be, but it seems like that's a female way of doing it.
Yeah, part of that Demeter connected consciousness, because the Zeus consciousness is focus. It's like when we focus our eyes on the computer screen, because it has to be focused what I want, what I'm interested in, what I'm doing what I'm doing right now. It's concentration too. And Demeter consciousness is what happens when you relax your eyes so that your peripheral vision kicks in. It's like moms and attentive dads develop, because you got to check where all the kids are, and be aware of danger that they might be in. And it is that same consciousness that is developed by a lot of the traditional female role that allows us to walk down the street and not bump into each other, as well as to take care of each other. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just looking for that to come forward. Like Wonder Woman is again a singular one. We have these singular, we're matching the hero archetype, which is one way, but I just look for the other as well.
Well, and Wonder Woman is Zeus. I mean, in a sense, she
Yeah.
goes into the, I love that scene where where Steve is telling her that this is no man's land. We haven't been able to gain an inch in all this time, and no one can do it. And she looks at him and she said, but that's what I came to do.
Yeah.
And she goes right in, and you look at Wonder Woman's, what she has in that particular recent movie. I think she did actually fight with people where she might hurt them. But usually her lasso is the lasso of getting people to tell the truth. It makes them tell the truth. It's that power of truth telling, and which is very empowering. Positive warrior can be a warrior energy. Often right now, we're using fake news. People are using fake news as like bullets to win their war, but truth is like the sword of truth is huge. And then our bracelets that take the fire. So that, if you're angry and you want to get something done and it's coming at you, you just kind of, got the bracelets to not take it in, that and be destroyed by it, but to send it back to them. Yeah. Well, that's actually that leads naturally to Persephone, Persephone, as in Greek mythology, very often the daughter of or the son of will have some of the characteristics of the parents, and just like who's married to whom would be important symbolically as metaphor. And so Persephone has a lot of the attributes that her parents have, and in the context of what you've been saying, I think of Persephone, an example of Persephone in the modern world, and I'll say a bit more about Persephone, is Elizabeth Warren, when Mitch McConnell, silenced her when she was going to read Coretta Scott King's letter on the Senate floor. And he said she was warned, and yet she persisted. Well, they did silence her by vote, and then what did she do? She went right outside and read it to all the TV cameras. And then she was in all the, she was on television, she was in every publication in the country. And with that in mind, that's a Persephone move. And it's very, very powerful. And you think, okay, here is Persephone. She gets abducted to the underworld. One thing to remember, by the way, is that at that time, marriages were arranged, and probably this was the story is reminding people, among other things, that but okay, fathers legally can marry off their daughters, but usually the correct thing to do is check with the daughter and the mom if that's a good idea. And part of the anger in this story is that wasn't done. But there she is, suddenly, she's probably attracted. A lot of the scholars say that she picked a flower, very vaginal kind of imagery. She gets taken down, abducted to the underworld, which some have seen as a metaphor for kind of the way that love can take us over. But it can also be, in more realistically, woo, she is trapped. She's down in the underworld. She is stuck, and it's not a very nice place. Well, some of the revisionist thinkers about this story say things like, you find out that very quickly she became the queen of the underworld. Well, was that just because she married him? No, it's because she went down there and she saw people where they were in the underworld. What happens in the underworld, according to Plato, is that's when everything is taken away from us, our bodies, our personalities, and we're left with our souls so we can have a new life. And she went and said, everybody's really scared. They don't know what's happening to them. Somebody ought to be teaching them what's happening. And to understand it's all right. They're going to get past this. This is going to be good for them. And when she goes back to her mother, she starts initiating mortals to not be afraid of death, as well as to maximize their lives. The key moment is the moment where she eats the pomegranate seeds. And if you believe she ate them on purpose, then you can imagine it a little bit like this. She's thinking, well, I've gotten to like this guy pretty much down here, but I miss my mom, and there's more. I want more than this life down here. And she gets an idea. There is this legend that if you eat the pomegranates, if you eat anything in the underworld, you have to go back. So she eats exactly the number of seeds she wants to, that she'll have to go back. And many scholars have said, in practice, she goes back and forth whenever she wants, because in any myth, if the myth is about the underworld, she's there, and if the myth is about the upper world, she's there. That really what she got is freedom. But she got freedom not because she fought terribly. What she did is she just got creative. And it's like that moment of, well, what can I do? And in your peripheral vision, you see some possibility. Well, there's Elizabeth Warren. She is being treated, silencing a woman senator on the Senate's floor. And by the way, the next day, allowing a man to read that same letter was the patriarchy in its really extreme form. And what does she do? She just gets creative. What can I do? I'll read it to the press. And so that now that phrase, and yet she persisted, has become basically the feminist mantra in everything. And so, that's another way of dealing with situations that is not overtly angry. Not that Elizabeth Warren can't get really angry, but she gets furious. But nevertheless, in this particular case, she had a Persephone move. I've also been in Persephone Rising. One of the things I write about Persephone is that she is connected to her soul. Zeus is a lot about ego, healthy or unhealthy ego, and Demeter is a lot about the heart. And Persephone is really about coming from a place of soul. And in the Jungian world, that would be much more following our dreams, our doing active imagination, and in various ways tapping into that inner knowing of what is going on and what can I do and what might I be doing. It's like an inner GPS system that can be for many people also is felt very much in the body. You may have experienced or times probably in your life that oh, this is a yes. And yeah, this is a no. And this is maybe. And the whole body knows. But it's also in Persephone's story that the soul, the information from the soul can also arise as desire. And by that, I don't necessarily mean sexual desire. That can be part of it, but a desire for anything. It is pleasure related. And in the sense, I'm taking this dance form, and there's this teacher that I studied with a real teacher here, but there's a thing on TV, and this really sweet dance teacher, as we dance around, reminds us always to make a choice for pleasure in a very sweet way. But and that doesn't mean the kind of self-indulgent pleasure that is so big in the world today. It means much more about staying. Deep pleasure is deep pleasure, and contentment is that kind of feeling when you feel like you're in just the right spot. This is just right for me right here for this moment. Do you know that place? You probably have many times you can remember of it, and beginning to be able to connect in that in that mode. Persephone, in experiencing the abduction, and by the way, I'm not, in this way of talking about this, I'm not trivializing that in our society there are real abductions that are horrible, and that women are being raped and women are being harassed, and taking a more metaphysical read of this book and metaphorical read of this story is not to take away from that truth. And obviously, she would not have ended up wanting to be with Zeus if he had actually been a rapist, as her mother may have feared that he would be. So there are many layers to myth always, and there's another use of this story is to really deal with the kind of trauma that women often experience. And with that in mind, I would say, though, that it is often through that kind of trauma that a kind of Persephone also does arise, which is, if you think about what Plato would say happens in Hades, well, in everyday psychological life, there are times that we're just ripped apart, basically. And very often our hearts shut down, and it's only our soul that is going to be able to help us. But it's at that point that a variety of things happen, and it is we know ourselves in a much deeper way, and from that, what happens with her is that she does find love, and if she'd really been abducted, probably it wouldn't have been him, it would have been somebody else. But she also finds a calling. She is called to a new vocation, and she knows who she is in that sort of sense, the work that she needs to do in the world. There are a couple of movies that have been out recently that I think are kind of Persephone-like. One is a Disney movie, Moana, who's the young girl who's called by the ocean to go and discover and to find what's there. And it's a calling that the people of her island all think she's nuts, but that ocean calls. And somehow she is essentially abducted by the ocean, in this sense, in a positive sense, when she just can't stop responding to that desire that she has. And but the other thing that's really amazing about this one is that this is happening more and more, by the way. She's the hero, and the traditional male hero in that is Maui. has lost his power. And he lost his power in part because he stole the heart of the goddess of the islands, basically an earth mother. He stole her heart. And because he wanted to impress people and be the one who is seen as creating everything, she actually rescues him, helps him get back his power. But then she's the one that returns the heart to that goddess who had turned into a fierce volcano and then becomes again the energy of fertility in the world. That's quite a story. It's extremely mythic and it's very Persephone-like. The other one is The Shape of Water, which you may have seen. Have you noticed that one? In this case, you have the mute woman who is working essentially as a janitor in a scientific lab, and there's this sea creature that had been worshipped as a river god, and they have captured, and the kind of military hero that's often in the past been primarily and the present been seen as a hero and sometimes is sadistic and is torturing this sea creature. And it's very clear that his intent is to take advantage of Eliza by sexually, because he thinks she can't scream as well as can't talk. And it ends up being a story about Eros, where she recognizes that this sea creature is intelligent, and they first empathize with each other. And there's empathy is like deep. Empathy is a deep kind of Eros when we can feel with another person or creature. And that empathy calls her to action to rescue him. And then they got romantically involved, which is interesting. That would be Best Picture in the United States, where traditional evangelical ideas are still very much there. But the other piece is that it's clear that she understands that, and that the love that they have between them, he's a sea creature and she's not, until she becomes a sea creature and goes into another dimension. But that he would have to be free, and she couldn't contain him and keep him. Part of what the negative part of the Zeus kind of reality you see with the refrain with the Trump rallies with Lock Her Up, which is theoretically about Hillary, but what's actually happening is an energy and a Zeus kind of fear of women getting out of limited roles and what that might mean for the world. And it is destabilizing, because we are transforming everything. The movie that I've seen, and I talked about it in another one of Laurel's programs, that has sort of a combination of Persephone and Demeter qualities, is Arrival, where you have the main character is a woman who's a linguist, Louise, and she's a linguist, and she is brought in to help the military be able to communicate with aliens that appear to come from the deep. And there's something about this, something coming deep out of the water, which in Moana, within all these three movies that I'm talking about, is telling us something about something that's coming out of the water element, which is this Eros energy, but also compassionate love, which is more of the Demeter kind of quality. And there's to me, the most impressive scene there is that shows who she is when they're all decked out in these um, in military garb that's to protect them against these aliens who sound like they're probably octopus. They look like octopi, and they sound like some maybe deep something coming out of the deep. And then everybody's terrified of them, and she is trying to understand and communicate with them, and she's not getting anywhere. And she strips off all of that defensive mechanism and keeps on her clothes, of course. But she goes over, and there's a wall, a glass wall between them, and she puts her hand up, and she looks at them, and you can see that she's actually energetically connecting with them. And they see, and she says, they won't trust me until they see me. And when she does that, one of a tentacle comes back from the other side and touches the wall, and that begins that connection. It's Demeter-like because she, in her imaginative life, she's thinking about this. She has visions of this child that she will have, or that she could have, or that she did have, except she didn't. And it's a girl, and it's a daughter, and it is a daughter that's going to die. And again, this is a Demeter theme. The Eros part is more the Persephone, but it's a Demeter theme. And what she realizes in the course of this is that she will choose love, and she will have that child, even though it will be painful for her to
Carol, that's a powerful weaving together of archetypal themes in all three of those films. Wow. Thank you. I mean, that's powerful. And what I love, that was my favorite scene in that Arrival film as well, that the hand, like, take off all of the, all of the technology, all of that, and just let me touch you. It's that, it is an emerging archetype of, I think, a more, for me, a more hopeful valuing of the rationality and the credibility of an intuitive feeling orientation in terms of knowing, where the intuitive feeling typically, especially in academia, as you well know better than most, is kind of it is exiled to some degree. It is marginalized. And so what we see coming through in all of these films that you're talking about, especially in Arrival, and I think also in The Shape of Water, is, I don't want to genderize it because it's not just a feminine way of knowing, although, if you're into typology, it leans more towards women, whether that's nature or nurture, who knows. But it is this recognition that in order to move forward, in order to evolve, I think we're going to have to begin to balance the scientific rational with this intuitive feeling way of knowing and way of learning.
Well, and that's also part of the point with Louise, because she does both.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's a linguist and she's really smart. So she has both of those. And to extrapolate out from the mother-daughter theme, I think in a time in the world that makes many of us really nervous about where we're going and how bad things could get. And by that, I mean things like nuclear war, climate change, that capacity to choose love and choose, and the Persephone archetype has an innate optimism, and not one that is not connected with reality, but to be so aware that it's worth it to show love in the world. And even if it doesn't end well, what happens if we don't do it? And then the Louise characters also has integrated the functions, so that what actually ends up working out to avoid disaster in that movie is that she actually is using both of those functions and using them really, really well, which is a little hard to do sometimes. You want to do Dionysus quickly? All right. Good old Dionysus is Persephone's child. That is not always the way myth has it, but it seems because in the Eleusinian mysteries, people would walk and dance for 14 miles to get to Eleusis to have the initiation rite. And all the way they were chanting about Dionysus. And when they got there, they were celebrating the birth of a divine child. So who else? I mean, the clues are all there that it was Dionysus. And in his story, he starts out, by the way, there's much evidence that at the time of Christ, Jesus, a lot of people thought Jesus and Dionysus were the same person. And there were a lot of similar things in the stories about them. One of which was Dionysus and Jesus, when they were born, the powers that be wanted to kill them. And so a lot of little boy babies got killed. But with Dionysus, there's a little difference in that people hid him, and he was dressed as a girl. And because he was dressed as a girl, he became very androgynous and was considered a god of women. And you probably, by the way, both Jesus and Dionysus turned water into wine, and the stories about them, which was another kind of connection. But Dionysus's story then departs and is different, and he would go into a city and play the trumpet, and they would have drums and call the women to the woods, and where they would dance wildly. And because Dionysus had been, he had people try to kill him, but they did several times, and he just popped back. He was kind of, he would just immediately be back again. So he wasn't scared of death at all. And sort of symbolically very resilient, because he just wasn't afraid. And he would help women who had very limited, in some ways, very locked in roles, go out and dance and just let it all go. And the other thing that he did, and he did some of that with men as well, but he was known particularly for letting women connect with their wildness and the energy of just giving into the joy of dance. Barbara Ehrenreich has this wonderful book that she wrote called Dancing in the Streets. And she talks about how in ancient times, many tribal cultures, the way that they would prepare for war by a kind of marching dance. But for everything else, they would dance in a circle. And that was the way that they would bond and be able to connect with being themselves and being with the group that's which is a connected consciousness that has a somewhat different quality than Demeter's connected consciousness, because this one is really about allowing joy to come out, allowing the capacity for ecstasy and joy and just enjoyment to be present, and that the way that would bond people. And then she talked about that was Dionysus, and Dionysus was not a god of drunkenness. That was the Greek equivalent, but there was not that kind of drunkenness with the Dionysian kind of revels. he's the god um, who invented drama, and or is credited with inventing drama, which started with poetry and then moved into drama. And with the ancient Greeks and in Athens, they would put on dramatic plays that would mirror to the community that would come together a lot of themes that were actually happening in the world, in their society. And a lot of the tragedies, they're warning against the Zeus arrogance of kings, and how bad it would happen. And then you have Lysistrata, which is about women deciding. It's like rather than not deciding not to let the grain grow, they're going to tell the guys that we're not going to have sex with them until peace is declared and the war is over, which is another kind of strategy. And there's another mythic story from the Greeks that is similar to that, which is the Sabine women who stopped a war by walking between the two armies with their children and saying, if you're going to kill each other, you have to kill us first. All these are, very ancient stories in which in which a certain kind of bravery, there's a certain kind of bravery, but it's not violent. And we find that now with people who get in, lie down so that the trees can't be destroyed or things that nature. It's very common in the ecological movement. But the energy that I think is really important with Dionysus is an antidote. If you look at different archetypes, see the problems in the world differently. The Zeus energy is saying, well, the problems are wimpiness, the problems are too much caring, the problems are terrorism, the problems are crime, etc. And the kind of Demeter energy says the problem is we're not caring for one another, we're not caring for the earth. And Demeter is saying we're not looking at enough new creative ideas of what we can do. But if you look at the Dionysian problem in our culture is unhappiness. And the relation of that unhappiness to the drug addiction, of the epidemic of addiction, which is huge. And so that Dionysus is the cure for despair, the cure for genuine pleasure, genuine fun, being able to just be in the body and have a good time with other people is an antidote to all of those things, and very, very important. But on just an everyday basis, in the Dionysian story, these stories are so wise in terms of they're talking about gods, but they're really talking about us. That because everybody was trying to kill Dionysus, he gets incredibly anxious. And he's scared. He's scared all the time. Here's this guy dressed as a little boy who's dressed as a little girl. He's terrified, looking around. He doesn't know what to do. And finally, at some point, he just goes crazy. And he starts wandering to find out what to do. And he gets to another culture that has an equivalent, a myth very much, initiation rites very much like the Eleusinian mysteries, with Demeter as the curative healer. And he's healed, but as he's healed, he becomes a healer. But the way that he heals people is connecting them to joy, and through mirroring that is entertainment and drama, where you learn not necessarily from your own mistakes or your own possibilities, but by seeing something that is entertainment that your mirror neurons allow you to develop that capacity and learn that skill without having to go through it. So in any case, I thought that with the Women's March, pink the pink pussy hats had a little bit of Dionysus in them. And what I was also struck with, and I've been to 2 of those major women's marches, and is how funny the signs were. My favorite being Free Melania, but my second favorite one was Now You Pissed Off Grandma, because I can identify with that one. But we also see it right now in the world in the of how many people actually get their news from comics. So we have Colbert, we have Samantha Bee, we have and we have a president who's actually quite funny if you step back. The other Dionysian thing that's going on right now is Stormy Daniels. You probably were doing something serious when I was watching the 60 Minutes about this interview with Stormy Daniels, and which she talked about with Donald Trump, thanks Zeus, just as our Zeus at the moment. And he's bragging about himself. He comes in and he's bragging about himself. And she says, you need a spanking. And actually she spanks him. And I think that the Dionysian impulse is there in she's an example of it. Comics are another one, but in her, this is the guy who's going to be the president of the United States. He wasn't yet the president of the United States, but he was somebody with a lot of money and a lot of power. And she was somebody who would be looked down on by a lot of people in the world. She doesn't take that in. She tells him he's the one. She makes fun of him because he's the one who doesn't know how to behave properly with other people, and gives him a spanking. So my sense is there's a lot of this comic kind of element going on in surprising, kind of shocking ways. Dionysus is also the god of chaos, and is fine with chaos, doesn't mind it. And we have that, at least in this country, in the White House and in Congress, and many of our lives, where the pace of life has gotten so fast, and particularly with our virtual, all of our technology that we're always attending to, that things can seem overwhelmingly chaotic. And it's the Dionysian energy that flows with that, just flows with that, says we can just dance into it. We do not have to go to be sad. And what I would say about the combination of the Dionysian and the Persephone energy is that they're young. It's young energy, and whether it's an older person or a younger person, and it's also hopeful and positive. And if we can see that every one of these archetypes that we are seeing in the world, or I'm seeing in the world so clearly, and are so ancient and so eternal, but have a trajectory to them, we can be very optimistic, because at the end of that story, at the end of the Eleusinian story, Zeus becomes a more facilitative leader. He realizes that it was a mistake to just have disdain for Demeter and for some of the other goddesses, that he needs them. And Demeter gets tougher and gets what she wants. She gets her daughter back. Persephone transforms the whole arrangement between the gods and mortals from one of authorities that the gods had been in a way of dealing with mortals by punishing them when they did things that were wrong, and appreciating them if they flattered them well enough. And after that, after Demeter won in her power struggle with Zeus, and Persephone showed that kind of creativity, that the relationship became much friendlier and much more facilitated, and much better for mortals, because Demeter and Persephone together said that mortals are not bad, they're just ignorant, and our task is to educate them. And of course, it was Dionysus that lightened everybody up. And in that Barbara Ehrenreit's book, she talks about how it's come down that progressive movements throughout history have always danced in the street or danced in the square, and that the Dionysian energy is there, and we don't have to dance to have that sense of joy of knowing that this could work out okay, because the archetypes like to evolve as human consciousness does, and that each one agent for that evolution, as we allow ourselves to evolve and to express all four of these in their positive and not their negative forms. So some thoughts?
Carol, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has just been so rich, and you've woven together so many threads and really, really given us, I think some really big questions, big thoughts, and I love the way you connected the archetypal to the cultural and even the political. Yeah. So we have a few minutes, guys.
Yeah.
I have a question. You had mentioned that the Women's March was a great combination between Zeus energy and Demeter's energy. Are there other situations like that you can say how that is illustrated? And then the other question I had, you said homeopathic dose. If you could just explain what that meant also.
Oh, well, homeopathic medicine very often is that it gives you a little bit of the substance that is hurting you, and somehow in that way curing it, and that's the homeopathic dose. It would be in a larger dose. It might even be poison. And probably what that is, just physically, is it builds the immune. It gets the immune system going to fight this other thing, and it's probably not that different than a vaccination. But I don't know, Laura, do you know more about that?
I was going to say I understand what you're saying, but I love the usage of it. I've never heard that before. So yeah.
Make a little of it.
Exactly. And then the other question, other examples.
Oh, other examples. Well, there's actually a lot. I mean, in the modern world, George Lakoff has done this. This is another political thing. Has done this work of talking about how the Democratic base and the Republican base think, and he talks about the Republican base as a stern father, and the liberal base, or the Democratic, as the nurturing parent. Mommy like, but both of those archetypes, when they cooperate, work pretty well. I mean, if mommy and daddy get along, and respect each other, or whether Congress or Parliament, who has those, and nurturing parents, if they respect each other and see what the other can contribute, it works pretty well. They really take away the negative sides of either of the archetypes when they're both present. So it's really almost everywhere when things are working well. You know, if you, what in a modern sense of what a good leader is usually is not just Zeus-like. You know, it's somebody who is strong and powerful and cares for the people and serves for the people. It's a good friend of mine just got named to the head of the Peace Corps in the United States, and the Peace Corps is an example. You know, it's for the courage to do it, for to help for adventure sometimes, and to help the people. You know, live with the scarce, and I think that's an important understanding, that healthy, that it's when these archetypes get in are antagonistic to one another that they don't work as well. And when they're present in a group, when they're all present in a group and everybody's respecting everybody, that works. And if they're all present in a person, you get a very mature, usually a quite mature person.
Well, Carol, that our time is up, and I know this group probably is resonating with questions, thoughts, insights. So write them down, email them, save them for the discussion circle that's coming up. Carol, this has been just such a wonderful and a rich contribution.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's nice to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have you, and it's I think it's a synchronicity that towards the end of this talk you were bringing in that character, the archetypal character that is rooted in love. This is Maundy Thursday, you know, religiously. If we look at that symbolically, and there were some postings about that on the Emerging Feminine page about the significance of Maundy coming from a command or a commandment, and the commandment is John, this, you know, new commandment I give you, that you love one another. And you brought that out beautifully and synchronistically towards the end of this your presentation. So thank you.
Good Friday is the time for us to let go of all the things in the way of that. Yeah, so a lot of synchronicities that are beautiful. So thank you for an eloquent presentation, a rich presentation. Thank all of you for being on. And I will see you all next Thursday. But like I said, feel free to go to Carol's website. If you don't have one or all of her books, she has a website. Is it carolpearson.com, right? Yes, Carol S.
Okay.
It's Carol S. because there's a lot of us with it.
All right. Yeah. So if you type in Carol Pearson, you'll get to her website. Thank you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Carol, thank you again. We will see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.